Hello everyone, my name is Yazan Erzikan, and today I'll be presenting my AP Seminar IMP presentation, and it is titled Constructive Memory, How Culture and Power Shape What We Remember. This presentation will explore how the way we remember history isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's about control. My research is guided by this question: how do culture and power shape collective memory, and what are the effects of this on history and identity? This question matters because today many people feel nostalgic for the past, but that nostalgia isn't always based on fact. A 2019 YouGov poll found that 70% of Americans think life was better in the past, even though most said their current lives are better. That contradiction tells us something important. Memory isn't just about what happened, it's about how we feel about what happened, and often it's about what we've been taught or told to remember. This disconnect between fact and feeling creates a larger problem. If we base our national identity on myths or false narratives, we risk repeating the injustices that those narratives ignore. Here's a quick overview of what I'll be covering today. First, I'll introduce my anchor sources and my central claim. Then I'll explain how power reshapes memory, give modern examples, address counter arguments, and finally I'll offer a solution and a conclusion. Memory is powerful. It connects us to our identity, our culture, and our past, but memory is also vulnerable, especially when it's shaped by governments, media, or dominant institutions. Think about it. Textbooks in the US often minimize or completely skip over the Tulsa Race Massacre, which left hundreds of Black Americans dead in 1921. Museums like some Holocaust museums in Eastern Europe downplay or omit their own country's role in collaborating with the Nazis. National holidays like Thanksgiving focus on harmony between settlers and indigenous people while ignoring the violence and land theft that followed. These examples don't just show how institutions don't just preserve memory, they shape it. They decide what stories define us, and just as importantly, which ones are left out. My argument is built around two key sources. The first source is false nostalgia. John von Norberg explains how politicians and leaders use myths about the past to make people feel good, even when those myths aren't true. For example, 18th century elites in England built fake castle ruins to make their estates appear more historic, connecting themselves to a noble past that never existed. Norberg says that this kind of nostalgia is comforting, but it's also dangerous because it hides real problems and makes people long for something fake. My second source is historian Judith Viney. In her study of New Zealand, she shows how British colonizers dismissed Maori oral traditions and rewrote them as written text to justify their control. While Maori viewed oral history as sacred and alive, colonizers preferred writing because they could control and edit it. Viney writes that the sayings of the Maori would sink, the hekas would float, meaning only the colonizers' version of history would survive. Together, these sources show how memory is manipulated by those in charge. When governments want unity, they often promote simplified and patriotic stories. This is why textbooks might highlight national pride, but leave out events like Japanese internment, redlining, or indigenous genocide. Norberg and Viney both argue that this isn't accidental, it's strategic. Controlling memory means controlling how people think about the past and what kind of future they believe is possible. In New Zealand, Maori memory was deeply tied to oral traditions, songs, stories, and genealogy. But colonizers didn't trust oral memory. They replaced it with written treaties and laws that only reflected their values. For example, Maori saw the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi as sacred and spiritual. The British, on the other hand, treated it as a legal justification for taking land. This rewriting of memory erased indigenous voices, and it still affects land rights debates today. Even today, memory is filtered by institutions. Scholar Aleda Asman calls schools and museums memory managers. They decide what's worth preserving and what's left out. In the US, school curriculums often avoid uncomfortable topics like police brutality or systemic racism. This selective storytelling reinforces power and protects dominant identities. Nostalgia is one of the most powerful forces shaping memory. People often remember the 1950s as time of peace and prosperity, but historian Daniel Clark interviewed Detroit auto workers who lived throughout the area. They described job instability, low pay, and racial inequality, not the golden age people imagine. Ben Carlson calls this golden age thinking. We don't remember facts, we remember feelings. This becomes even more dangerous when nostalgia is used for political gain. Alan Levinovitz warns that nostalgia often fuels authoritarian politics. Leaders promise a return to better times, even if those times included minorities or oppressed others. Shows like Stranger Things or Happy Days celebrate the past, but they also promote cultural sameness and ignore the struggles of marginalized groups. So when we say make America great again, we have to ask, for who was it actually great? So what's the solution? We need to teach multiple perspectives in schools, especially those left out of dominant narratives. Projects like the 1619 Project, Indigenous oral storytelling, and immigrant narratives should be part of the national education. We also need media literacy to help people recognize when nostalgia is being used to manipulate or mislead, especially on social media platforms like TikTok or YouTube, where simplified history spreads fast. Some people argue that nostalgia is harmless, that it's just tradition, and helps people feel connected to their heritage. But when that tradition erases injustice, it's harmful. For example, the suburban ideal of the 1950s left out black families through housing discrimination and redlining. Others say oral history is unreliable because it changes over time, but written history changes too. Textbooks are updated constantly. Old traditions evolve because they stay relevant to the community. That's a strength, not a weakness. Finally, some claim revisiting painful history divides us. But the truth is, ignoring pain doesn't create unity, it creates silence, and silence protects inequality. Throughout this presentation, we've seen that memory is not just a reflection of the past, it's a tool that can be used to shape identity, justify control, or resist oppression. Norberg shows how nostalgia replaces facts with comforting stories. Binding reveals how oral memory was erased to support colonial rule. Aspen explains how schools and museums filter history to protect power. If you want truth, justice, and progress, we have to ask not just what we remember, but who chose it and why. If you don't question how memory is built, we risk letting myths replace truth and what society was built upon, justice. Thank you. This is all my works-cited.
Thank you. Now for the oral defense questions. How did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process? Did your research go in a different direction than you originally planned or hypothesized?
Can you read the question, please?
Sure. How did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process? Did your research go in a different direction than you had originally planned or hypothesized?
So at first, I wanted to look at how nostalgia makes people remember the past in a better way than it really was. But once I read Norberg and finding sources, I saw that it was bigger than just feelings. It was also about control. I also realized people in charge use memory to control what stories are told. So I changed my question to focus more on how culture and power shape memory and not just nostalgia.
Okay. Next question. If you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to this issue?
I'd look more into how social media and AI are also changing memories. People get their history from a lot of short videos and YouTube Shorts and TikToks, which are they often leave out a lot of stuff, important information. And I want to see how things like algorithms or fake news are shaping what people really think about.
All right, thank you.